Hundreds of delegates from the international security community are set together in Singapore this weekend for the annual IISS Shangri-La Dialogue. And all eyes will be on the keynote address, which will be delivered by Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Well, Olivia Seong takes a look at the highlights of some of the past keynote speeches at the summit.
It's the centerpiece of the Shangri-La Dialogue every year.
Today, we are being called to rise above divisions and competition to work together.
I recount this history to show that Southeast Asia is no stranger to the great game of nations.
I myself have a strong sense of urgency that Ukraine today may be East Asia tomorrow.
The keynote address of the Security Summit takes place at the opening dinner on the first day of the annual event. Previous world leaders have used the platform to outline their views on regional and global security challenges, at times providing ideas to resolve potential flashpoints. Last year, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese weighed in on the rocky China-US relationship, calling for guardrails to prevent a worst-case scenario.
This isn't about a policy of containment. It's not a question of placing obstacles in the way of any nation's progress or their potential.
Others have also used the stage to outline their country's position on at times contentious security-related issues. This year's speaker, Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos, likely to reiterate his country's increasingly assertive stance on the contested South China Sea, where tensions have been escalating. All eyes will also be on other claimant states, including China, who are likely in the ballroom, and their response in the days to come.
For more on the upcoming Shangri-La Dialogue, let's bring in Olivia Seong, our China correspondent, Leong Wai Kit, who covers ASEAN, and we're also joined by Mr. Choi Shing Kwok, Director and CEO of IC's Yusof Ishak Institute. Well, thanks for joining us, one and all. Let's start with you first, Ollie. So it looks like it's not just what's on the agenda that's going to be catching eyeballs. It's also what's happening on the sidelines that is equally important. And one of the big things we're looking out for is that conversation where the defense ministers meet between China and the US. So what exactly is at stake here?
Well, we know we did hear from the Pentagon a few days ago announcing that this meeting between the defense chiefs of China and the US is on the cards. We have to note that China has not confirmed it yet, as is typically the case with these high-level, high-stakes meetings. But if this meeting were to take place, it would be the first time that the two defense chiefs of both countries will be meeting since 2022. And we do know that China's defense ministry has said that their defense minister, Dong Jun, who they have confirmed will be attending the Shangri-La Dialogue, will meet delegation leaders from, quote, related countries. So we'll have to wait for further confirmation on that. But a potential meeting comes after a phone call that the two defense chiefs had back in April. And that was significant as well. It was the first time that they had spoken directly since 2022. And also following that slight thaw in relations between China and the US after that big meeting between US President Joe Biden and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping back in November. Since then, we have seen more high-level exchanges between China and the US. And back then, we also know that military-to-military dialogue had been cut off following that controversial visit by then US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. So today, we also heard China and the US holding these maritime consultations, agreeing to continued dialogue, but also that warning from Beijing for the US to not infringe or carry out provocation in nearby waters. We know this comes amid tensions in the South China Sea and Taiwan. That likely all to be on the table when the defense chiefs, if this meeting does go ahead.
Yeah. So, Mr. Choi here, I mean, like, we've talked about how China's representation has sort of changed over the years. But what do you think this time around Beijing is going for? I mean, considering that, we talked about a little bit about this yesterday, that sometimes their discussions are often being viewed as critical. But, Mr. Choi, what do you think China's objective is at the Shangri-La Dialogue this coming weekend?
Well, thank you for having me again. I think that, as I mentioned yesterday, The organizers, IISS, have been taking pains over the years to assure China that their attendance at the ministerial level will see them being given what I would think is appropriate placement for a speech that is very much on par with what is also given to the US side. And I think this plays into the recognition which they would like to acknowledge of great power status. And that is a positive for China. I think in past editions, they have used this to their advantage. The placement kind of allows them to make some timely, proactive statements on issues that they anticipate will come up, but also because they speak after the US Defense Secretary the following morning, they can actually reply to what the US Defense Secretary will have said on Saturday. I think this gives them an opportunity to put out very important messages to a global audience in a time when several issues could be in the headlines. I think the other incentive that China will take into account, really coming into this dialogue, is the opportunity to engage bilaterally. You talked about it earlier, engaging with the US on neutral territory in Singapore. I think that is an opportunity that had been kind of, sort of between Biden and Xi Jinping. They had actually agreed that the chiefs should meet, and I think now is about to happen physically, hopefully, later on this
and picking
weekend.
up on what Mr. Choi was actually saying about how, we are waiting, this summit is also a chance for the Chinese defense minister to retort, rebuke Lloyd Austin's speech the day before. So, Olivia, let's just tell us a little bit more about this Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jin. It is his first time attending the event, but we don't know that much about him.
Yeah, this is the first time that the Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jin will be attending the Shangri-La Dialogue. In fact, it's only his second trip overseas, at least from what we know publicly, because he was only appointed to the post at the end of last year in December. We know that that's because he took over from the former defense minister, Li Shangfu, who was abruptly removed from his post last year. And Mr. Li back then was the one that attended the Shangri-La Dialogue. So this is Dong Jun's first time attending this event. Last year, we know that China had reportedly refused to meet the US given heightened tensions. We talked about the tensions over Pelosi's trip, but also there had been heightened tensions over the US shooting down that alleged Chinese spy balloon over its territory. Also, we know that Mr. Li back then had been sanctioned by the US, and that would have made for a rather awkward meeting, and we know that China refused to meet the US. So this time, the fact that a possible sit-down is going to happen is being seen by observers, as Mr. Choi said, as a positive step in ongoing thaw in relations. But we do know that, if we're talking about whether we'll see a difference with a different defense minister from China at the helm, is quite unlikely, because China's defense minister has the role of being the military's face for its military diplomacy. In terms of policy-wise or strategy-wise, that's still very much left to the military officers. But we do have to know that Mr. Dong, his background, he is going to be speaking at a plenary session on China's global security concept on Sunday. Timing-wise, as Mr. Choi mentioned, that's going to be on Sunday after not just the US defense chief, but also after the Philippine president, Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s speech on Friday at the opening session, and where he will more than likely talk about the Philippines' position on the South China Sea. And we know there have been those tensions between Philippines and China. So how will Mr. Dong calibrate his speech? What sort of language will he use? That's something that we'll be looking out for.
And I haven't forgotten about you, White Kid. I want to bring you in now. Let's just talk about, because we talked about how all eyes also will be on that keynote speech by the Philippines president. What do you think the messaging is going to be like, given, the heightened tensions in the South China Sea and also with other claimants in that room?
Right. I think the messaging will not be a surprise. It will be consistent that the Philippines wants to assert its sovereignty rights on the South China Sea. But what would be interesting would be the tone of the speech, the choice of words that he picks, given that he's going to be speaking in this part of the world and perhaps directly to other South China Sea claimants, including and especially to China, whom I believe will be closely watching this keynote speech if he does touches on South China Sea. When he was in Australia earlier this year, he had made two public statements about the South China Sea, once in Canberra during a special parliamentary sitting and another time in Melbourne in a think tank address, which I also attended. Both times he spoke candidly about South China Sea, but in Canberra he'd been described as not mincing his words and being extremely direct, using the phrase, and I quote, that he will not allow foreign powers to take even 1 square inch of its sovereign territory. So it'd be interesting to see what President Marcos brings to the table. And here, Mr. Choi, I know that you said earlier that Singapore is seen as neutral ground for China and US to engage each other, but I'm wondering, I want to bring in your views. How do you think China will view this if Manila were to use the Shangri-La Dialogue as a platform to make its position known on the South China Sea?
I don't think this would be unexpected. I think that President Marcos, in using this speech and having the Chinese in the audience, unlike the earlier occasions, I believe his speech will be a nuanced one. That, of course, you have mentioned there are fundamental and probably irreconcilable differences between the perspectives of Manila and Beijing over issues such as claims. But it is a little bit different, I think, when it comes to the other issues at stake, which has to do with the behavior or conduct of security forces on the ground. I think as far as that part is concerned, actually there could be room for some compromise. In particular, I think in this occasion, President Marcos would want to seek to try to put across that he is not wanting to escalate tensions. He would want to de-escalate while standing firm and resolute on the sovereignty issues.
Right. We don't have much time left, but just very quickly, Olivia and Kit, you're both going to be working hard on the ground this weekend covering the Shangri-La Dialogue. Olivia, first, what will you be specifically looking at?
Well, I think one of the key things to watch will be China with the new defense minister at the helm, Dong Jun. How will China respond to Marcos' speech, to U.S. Defense Chief Lloyd Austin's speech? How will it calibrate his response? Will there be more frosty relations or will it continue a thaw? And then all those bilaterals that go on.
Okay, why, Kit?
Very quickly, I'll be looking out for whether or not the Israeli-Hamas conflict will be brought up. There's no known schedule for discussion. And secondly, I'm looking out for which Myanmar-related specialists would come to the Shangri-La Dialogue. We know both sides, the Myanmar army and the opponents, are not invited. I'm looking out for whether or not the new UN envoy Julie Bishop might be here, and the not so new envoy Alun Kiau Kitikun, who has gone to Myanmar and meet me online twice.
All right, you're going to need lots of coffee to stay awake for that. Thanks so very much. We have Olivia, as well as Waikit, as well as Mr. Choi Shing Kwok, Director and CEO of IC's Yusof Ishak Institute.